So let's talk about Cape Arundel. It's in Kennebunkport, Maine. Up there in Maine, New England. I think that this golf course exudes some of the most unique golf architecture that anybody can play. It is a semi-private club, private club really, that allows public tee times. They offer them a few days in advance, and rates run between $100 to $225 depending on the season. The course was designed by Walter Travis in 1920. It was a redesign of an Alex Finley design that was built in 1896. So golf has been there for a long time. Garrett, what stood out to you about Cape Arundel?
Well, the first thing is obviously that piece of land. That's the first thing that you notice when you drive onto that property. Now, when you drive onto Cape Arundel Golf Club, you're literally going through the golf course. It has maybe one of the most hazardous golf roads that you can imagine. It goes right through the center of the golf course, so you really have to watch out for golf balls. But once you're in the middle of that property, you start to see the surrounding rivers, I guess you would call them, but they're tidal rivers, right? So they're bringing in water from the sea, and when the tides go out, they're almost completely empty. And then when the tides come in, they're really full. So there are a lot of changes there. And it's just this incredibly beautiful location. It's pretty near the ocean. And you've got these rivers kind of forking throughout the property. And the golf course sits around those rivers, plays across those rivers. That's kind of the dominant theme there. There are some houses on the other side of the rivers and stuff, but they're not really on the golf course. So it's just one of the most kind of tranquil places that you can imagine. I mean, it's just a wonderful location for a golf course.
One of the things that people will look at is that it's a 5,800 yard golf course, but you are not being cheated at all out there. It packs a punch. It's not very easy. It's a par 69. And just to give you a frame of reference, so all of the PGA Tour players in the late 90s, early 2000s came out there and played because of the President's Cup. Fred Couples held the course record at 61. So this is a par 69, only 8 under on a 5,800 yard golf course. Yeah. Phil Mickelson's the course record holder now at 60. So not crazy when you consider the length. It packs a punch, and why it packs a punch is the greens.
Yes, yeah, the greens are wild at this course. 5,800 yards, it's a 90-acre property, right? So there can't be much more than 5,800 yards. That's about all that you could get out of this property. It's a par 69. There's only one par 5 on the course, and it's a pretty short one, the 9th hole. And so what you really have is a great collection of greens. And maybe we should get into those right now.
Yeah, and I think that's it. It's one of the greatest sets of greens that anybody can play. And we covered another golf course with a great set of greens in this series, Pasatiempo, a few episodes before. These are drastically different sets of greens. And one defining feature doesn't make a set of greens great, but these greens stand on their own as very unique and varied, and they are wild at times. And then there are some more toned down ones that are really a little bit more subtle, but brilliant in their own right. So what do you think makes these greens great?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a question that's hard for people to answer. What makes a great golf green and what makes a great set of greens? And so starting with just the individual greens, what you have are not just crazy greens. They're not just wild, right? They have very kind of intentional internal and external contours. And so you can put pins all over the place on these greens. They're not like these unpinnable, severely tilted greens. You can put pins in lots of different places. And so what separates one section of an individual green from another are these contours that Travis built into the green. So the internal contours of the greens kind of separate great shots from just good shots, right? If you're not in the right section of these greens, if you're not in the pinned section of these greens, then you're gonna have a tough putt. You're gonna have to really judge your lag putt precisely. And so that's one factor, one basic factor. And then another thing that's happening with these greens is the external contours. I think Walter Travis has a really unique way of designing external contours on his on the greens on his courses. And what he does is create these kind of bumps that are just on the edges of the greens. And there are usually multiples of these bumps on each green. And what this means is that if you miss the green, often what you're confronting is not just, the internal contours of the green, right? You're also confronting this bump. You might be behind it, you might be kind of on the side of it, you might get to use it to kind of filter your ball to the hole, or it might be a real problem for you. You might have to be chipping over it, and you might not be able to get your ball in a position where it's going to filter to the hole unless you hit an incredible shot. And so, those are kind of that's where I would start in like assessing a set of greens. Look at the internal contours, look at the external contours, and you have a lot of interesting things that can happen depending on different pin positions at Cape Arundel. But then you start to consider what makes a great set of greens. And you and I were talking about this a little bit when we were playing the golf course. So what do you think are some of the things that across 18 greens, what makes a great set of?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that Cape Arundel has with their greens is a ton of variety. You don't play one green and you think that's really similar to this other green at the golf course. Like, you go through the greens and it gives you a really nice welcome with the first green. The right half of the first green is pretty simple. It's a front pitch green, but it introduces you on the left half to some of the wild side of these greens. And it's got kind of a ridge that cuts through in the front left portion of it that creates wild pin positions over there. So I think one of the things is that these greens have a lot of, there are some really standout greens that really make your jaw drop in terms of, wow, I can't believe I've seen that green. But then there are some other ones that at first glance, you look at it and oh, that's a little bit more toned down, but you get on it and you're like, oh, this is pretty brilliant. So, some of the greens that stand out in terms of that they are just eccentric and wild are the 8th, the 10th, the 11th. The 17th would be a really great example of a wild green. The 14th would be another wild green. But then you have some more subtle, toned down ones that are really brilliant because they drive some strategy back and they do it with more orientation. So you have some wild undulations on some, and then like the 4th and the 7th are good examples of greens that have orientation and a little bit more simple slopes and smaller slopes that really drive some strategy of where you want to be. And those happen to be right next to each other. With the 7th is a great example of a hole. The front right has just enough interest built into it. He put some undulations in there to create a little pocket, and that adds a little spice in the front right. But then it gets kind of long and narrow into the back left, and he puts mounding on the exterior, like you talked about. And what that mounding does is it really promotes playing up the right side. If you can play along those bunkers on the right side of the fairway, push it up the right, then all of a sudden it opens up everything into that green, and you can hit a wide array of shots. You could hit a running shot, you could hit a wedge that you fly back there, and you don't have to contend with any blindness, any possible bad bounces off the mound. Especially if it's firm out there, that's where you get, these greens. The other thing about them that I really love about them is that all of the undulations that he creates internally, it makes all these different types of greens. So in certain spots, there are pockets that are like bowls. They're like kind of punch bowly if you're approaching from the right angle. If you're approaching from the wrong angle, it'll deflect it away. But also he has greens that have portions that have shots that play kind of like your traditional benched in uphill shot that's gonna receive a shot in well, and also a back portion that runs away a little. And a green that comes to mind with that would be the 12th. So the 12th hole, it looks like it's flat, but in a way that back portion of that green runs away, and it's really tricky. So when you put all these greens together, it's the variety of them. They aren't all loud. They aren't all in your face. Kind of displays between wild and softer, but still very complex.
Right. Yeah, and in terms of the set of greens and how they tell a story, you really reach a crescendo in the middle of the round, where you have the 8th green, the 9th green, 10th, 11th. Those are some pretty wild, classic Walter Travis, Cape Arundel greens. The 10th especially stands out. It's very visible on the property, for one thing. If you're standing around the clubhouse, you can kind of see it. You can see it when you're driving into the course. It's kind of pushed up near one of the rivers. And that green is just brilliant. And the way that it relates to the rest of the hole is also really great, I think. Basically what you have on this hole is a fairly short par 4. But down the right-hand side of the hole are all these little mounds that you'll see throughout Cape Arundel. This is one of the themes of this course, this is what A.W. Tillinghast, the golf architect, called alpinization, right? This kind of old-fashioned building of mounds down sides of fairways and near greens. And they don't necessarily look natural, but they're kind of rugged and jagged looking in a way. They're these just humps and hollows, and if you're in them, they're really difficult. They're a hazard, right? They're maybe even a tougher hazard in some ways than just a normal bunker. And so you have that down the right side of the hole. If you hit your drive over those, then you'll get a much shorter shot into the green. But what happens when you hit your drive to the right on this hole is that the green all of a sudden just rejects you from every angle, right? You have a big bunker in the front, and the green is very much oriented on a diagonal that's going to receive a shot best from the left side of the fairway. So I think what this hole does is it tempts long hitters into playing down the right side of the hole. You see this hazard out there, these bumps that you can probably hit over if you're a long hitter, and your impulse might be to just go straight at them and try to shorten the hole as much as possible. But then you find yourself on the right side of this hole with a little kind of flip wedge over this fronting bunker to a green that just doesn't receive that shot at all. And then when you get up there, I don't even know how to describe that green. I mean, there's a false front, there's all these little wings, there's these runoffs. It's just this kind of complex, sculpture in a way.
I think the next green, 11, I mean, there are 3 greens here, 8, 10, and 11, that, above all else, from just the wow factor. You walk up to these greens and you're just like, you can't believe the audacity of them to build this green. The 11th green, and really, the green right next to it, the 5th green, is a great contrast of 5th green is so simple, but you just put this big mound in the middle.
A bump in the middle.
Yeah, that affects everything. So this is maybe one of the most simple greens there. It's one big mound in the middle, and it's pretty flat around the mound, but that mound does, everything it needs to for that hole. The green right next to it is the 11th green, which is maybe the most complex. So it's got a kind of a high left side, a low front, and then a lower right bowl.
Yeah.
And it effectively creates 3 very, very drastically different hole locations. The hole kind of plays along a ridge, and it's a shortish par 4, like a lot of them here. But it's a really fun hole to hit a wedge into, no matter where the pin is. The bowl on the right is going to be really easy. It's a really gettable pin, and this is one of the things I love about greens, great greens, is the malleability of them, right? You could set the 11th up to be the easiest hole probably on the golf course when you put it on the right bowl. Everything's going to funnel down in there. Then the pin we saw was front left. This is one of the most difficult pins on the golf course. You have to play up the right in order to get to a spot where you have a chance to hit into the slope the right way, and it creates kind of a backboard, but it's, you have to hit it right in the perfect spot for the backboard to work. It's a really demanding pin, and if you're not in the right section, your 2-putt's really tough. And then that top left section is obviously a high plateau. There's not a ton of space. You have to hit a really precise shot to get there. So in that green, you've got 3 really great sections. And I think that is a green that kind of typifies like easy, really hard and very hard, right?
Yeah, and the 12th green, the 11th green is an example of a green that where different pin positions change the strategy of the hole. We played 8 different shots into that green. How many of them kicked away from that pin, right? Because they were just like moving the wrong direction when they arrived. It was so hard to get there. So you really needed to find an angle in order to get it close. Now, the approach in there was pretty close for long hitters, like not a long approach for long hitters, but really tricky to get it in a position where you felt comfortable that you were even going to two-putt, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the magic of a great green on a hole like that, is that it really creates a lot of strategy and interest, and it also protects par at the course if that's something that you're particularly concerned about. And I don't think we are, but
I think, one of the things that allows for these greens, one of the things that allows these greens to really shine and be, I think, not over the top, is that the land is quieter. It's a little flatter, right? So you're not having to overcome massive hills to get to these greens, right? You're not having to hit a shot up 20 yards, into the green and you can barely see it and you're worried about hitting uphill, spin, all this. But also, the shorter nature of the course, I think, allowed Travis to really go nuts too, because a lot of these holes, you hit your tee shot, and a lot of people's favorite types of holes are these short par 3s, right? This course, off the tee, you're trying to position yourself to get into the most advantageous spot to hit your short par 3 shot, and you don't have to. I think it really levels the playing field. It's one of those really fun courses because you can hit, somebody hitting at 220 can still hit a lot of wedges, and somebody hitting at 300 might want to throttle back some on some holes because, they don't want to push it. They'll learn if they push it up a lot, you can get yourself into some really bad spots when you don't have the ability to spin the ball. But when you miss, when you're not really precise, then the two-putt becomes really tough. You have to hit really great, as Bill Coore and Ben Crenshaw say, approach putts. It's really just a course that allows your imagination to, kind of go wild.
Yeah, and I think a good example of that sense of fun is the 17th hole. This is going to be a hole that everybody remembers when they play this course. They're going to remember it forever because it's so unique. I don't think I've seen a hole that's quite like it. Basically, it's a mid-length to short par 4, and out where a long drive might end up is a big crossing bunker, and then the land just falls away toward the river from there, and you can't see the green from the fairway or from the tee. And so you just kind of hit your drive up there, try to get it maybe close-ish to the bunker or a little ways back so that you have kind of a full wedge distance in. And then you just kind of chip your shot over the bunker, and then you go to the other side and you see where it ends up. And essentially, the green complex consists of this, approach area that goes severely downhill. And then you have a green with a high shelf in the front, and then it runs away very quickly to the back, and there's a lower shelf in the back. And there's a little bit of a backstop back there so that shots might kind of collect at the bottom if they're coming in a little bit too fast. Now there's a big, tall bird box that serves as an aiming point for this hole. And so, if you're familiar with the course, then you'll kind of learn where you need to hit your shot in relation to the bird box. That's kind of the point of reference. But this green is incredible. I mean, it's so dramatic. It just kind of spills down toward the river. There's not necessarily a lot of strategy to this hole, but it's just really fun, really memorable, and just kind of going around that bunker and seeing where your ball ends up is kind of a thrilling moment. And I think that greens can be funny, right? Golf course architecture can be funny sometimes. And I think that's a funny hole. Funny things can happen there, ridiculous things can happen. it's right toward the end of the round, but it's not the final hole, so you don't have to be so serious. And so that's a last element of a great set of greens, is that there need to be at least a few that kind of make you laugh, I think.
Yeah. It's the one green that is so great that we didn't talk about is the 8th, and
I mean, that green makes me laugh too.
It's
that back shelf is so small.
It's so tiny, and it's just, it's one of the longer holes out there, and you're playing up, and then they have these bunkers that kind of sit 20 yards in front of the green, and then coming out of those bunkers is this green that rises up and then falls off every side. I mean, it is just an extraordinary green. I don't know if there is an easy pin position on that green. It's just one of those like all-time rejector greens, right? And it's a small target. And it's, what I find interesting about it is the cadence of the course. And they kind of jog between this idea of really wild green and, more tamed down green, but still extremely intricate, right?
Yeah, and so you've got that variety through the round, you've got that cadence through the round, and then you just have those interesting different contours within the greens and along the kind of external portions of the greens. I think those factors, when you put them together and you make sure that those greens are relating strategically to the holes that they're on, you have a great set of greens. And so that's what you find at Cape Arundel. And just one final piece of what it's like to play this course, you have these fascinating greens that you just want to play over and over. You want to put them in your backyard and try to figure them out. And then you have a very walkable, very pleasant, very beautiful course. And you add all that up and it's just a place that you want to play over and over again, right? It's not really a tough 36 hole day course, right? You really want to play that second round and get another chance at those pin positions that you saw. It's just such a great place to spend the whole day playing golf, right? This is not, you play 18 holes, you're exhausted, you're done for the day. You just want to keep going back and trying again with these greens, trying to score as well as you think you should at a 5,800 yard par 69 golf course. And that for me is that's the Cape Arundel experience. It's just a fun place to play golf, and it's not by any means easy, but you just want to keep trying it again and again.